Welcome to Share, a podcast production of Amethyst Recovery Centers. I'm your host, Kabir Singh. At the top of each episode, we like to remind our listeners that addiction is treatable and recovery is possible. If you or a loved one are struggling with addiction, call Amethyst today at 855-80-SOBER or visit us online at amethystrecoverycenters.com. It's often said that addiction does not discriminate. People from all walks of life may turn to drugs for one reason or another, even those we see on TV. Today, our guest is Keith Mills, a retired sports broadcaster in Baltimore, whose illustrious career spanned several decades. In the early 2000s, Mills was arrested for stealing prescription pain medication. This incident cost him his job at TV station WMAR. Mills entered treatment and reestablished himself in the Baltimore news scene by taking a job at WBAL, which he retired from in 2019. We're glad to have him here as a guest today to share his story and his strength with us. Hey, Keith, welcome to Share.
Bear, nice to talk to you, buddy. Looking forward to it.
Of course, glad you're here. And you opened up with, of course, the little blurbs that I normally do. And I don't think it's any big surprise to any folks or listeners here on this particular podcast that folks who end up on TV also have issues with substance abuse or alcoholism and the like. And so that's been your experience. You've been at it for decades, certainly in your career. But before the substance abuse, how does somebody get started in sports broadcasting? So it's a fascinating thing.
Yeah, in my case, it was ironic. My father worked at WJZ TV, Channel 13 in Baltimore for 40 years. So I grew up in that environment. Jerry Turner and Al Sanders and those legendary newscasters at Channel 13, man. I grew up kind of, watching them, how they did it. But, I was interested in writing when I was in high school, joined the school newspaper. And my first job was actually at the old Baltimore News American, which at the time was a competitor to the Baltimore Sun. And the sports editor was a guy named John Stedman, legendary sports editor in the NFL Hall of Fame media wing, as a matter of fact, being one of the most well-known sports writers of his era. Well, I started working as when I just got out of high school in the News American, but there was in the late 1970s, there was this big satellite boom that, basically CNN started with Ted Turner and the ESPN came online, and local TV stations were hiring a lot of other producers and production assistants to take care of the volume of video that was now coming out of the sky. So I got a job at Channel 13 as a sports producer, basically because of my father. I knew a lot of people up there, and Randy Blair was the sports director at that time. And, just worked with him for about 4 or 5 years. And then Al Sanders called me in one day and said, "Hey, it's time." And I'm like, "It's time for what? Am I getting fired or what? What's going on here?" He goes, No. He goes, "It's time for you to go in front of the camera instead of behind it." I said, "Oh man, I don't know if I want to do that." He convinced me to do it. Channel 13 put me on the air as a sports reporter, going out doing stories on University of Maryland and any of the Colts had just left. So the Orioles and things like that, a lot of high school sports. So that's how I really got started on the air. But it was my father's history with Channel 13 that really kind of triggered my involvement in broadcasting from a very young age.
Yeah, so
I was very lucky.
Yeah, certainly so. Not an uncommon sequence of events. A lot of children, I guess I should say, do follow in their parents' footsteps, and it sounds very exciting to be around. As a child, hearing how, as you just described it, being around these influential people.
Oh yeah.
You've been in Baltimore. It sounds like you've always been in Baltimore, right?
Yeah, grew up in Baltimore. Grew up in Brooklyn Park section of Anne Arundel County, real close to the BWI airport. So I was always involved in. I played a lot of sports. My father coached. Was always going out. He was the home plate camera operator for Orioles baseball when Channel 13 had a contract for 25, 30 years. So I would literally go, and they would set all the cameras up. I'd be out there, 2 in the afternoon for a 7 o'clock game. And, I'd sit next to Chuck Thompson and Bill O'Donnell, the guys that were broadcasting the game. And I took it for granted. I just thought, hey, this is what every kid does. Every kid gets to sit there and watch an Orioles game. But as I got older, I realized that no, every kid doesn't. and I was very fortunate. So yeah, growing up in Baltimore was a bonus for me in regards to, you know, the Orioles and then the later the Ravens being so good. So I was very, very lucky, very fortunate.
Yeah, very very special time at the risk of sounding like two like older guys that are doing this podcast right now. A very special time in history. I could just picture it now that, you know, there weren't all these different ways to view. We'll go ahead and talk about the Orioles. You're talking about Orioles baseball games. You either watched it on the channel it was being broadcasted on, or you were there. It's kind of either or. There wasn't another way, and there's two ways to be there in the capacity that you were. I'm sure was very exciting at that age. And then, so you're now on TV. They're sending you out. How old are you at this point? Like,
I'm 63 now.
No,
I
at
started
that point.
at that time. Oh man,
Yeah.
I was 28 at that
Okay.
time. 26, 27, 28 when I started going on the air.
Right.
Yeah, I was 22 when I got the job.
Did you,
you know.
did you ever think it was going to get, so while you were in the backgrounds, you know, producing and the like, and the sort of operational management, that all that does go in the back end of
Right.
things,
Absolutely.
people don't see. Did you ever picture yourself being in front of the camera?
Never did.
Yeah.
Never did. My father even asked me about that when I started working. He goes, you ever any desire to go in front of the camera? And I said, no. Randy Blair asked me the same thing. I said, no, I have no desire. You know, everybody's intimidated by the red light when the camera comes on. I was certainly one of those guys that were intimidated by it. You know, I would watch, you know, Jerry and Al and Randy and Bob Turk and Marty Bass and all those guys that were on the air at the time, Richard Scher, and I would just marvel at how they were able to do it. But you know, the key to me was I learned everything about production. I learned how to put things together, how to write for TV, how to edit, how to do all those things. I was helped by some extraordinarily unselfish and talented people at Channel 13 who sat me down and taught me how to do it. So I guess that was the next step, to go in front of the camera. Once I did it and got a little bit of confidence, it seemed like a natural progression. But like everybody, the first time you do it, you're scared to death because you know there's a lot of eyes out there watching you. You don't know how many, but you know they're watching, and it can be a pretty daunting kind of thing for anyone that's not done it. So
in this, I'll go ahead and just say it like it is. In this, basically, this fraternity of men, the sports broadcasters and the like, and people of business, certainly at that time, with jobs widely held by men, probably like drinking and sort of using going on. You know, I'm not really looking for names here, but just on a broad level, probably happening, right? I mean,
no question.
Yeah,
no doubt. I mean, there's a lot of pressure, both externally and internally, in not just sports broadcasting, but broadcasting. I mean, you know, a lot of very driven, motivated, talented people, and it's a deadline job, as you know. I mean, you can't miss the deadline. Show starts at 6 o'clock. You got to be on the air. You can't say, hey, I'm late, running late. You know, the red light comes on, you got to be ready. So at the end of every show, you know, we had a 6 and 11 at that time, so we did the 6 o'clock news and the 11 o'clock news. And at 11:30 rolls around, I mean, you're like, whoo, we got through that one. And you know, you went to Alonzo's or you went to Mount Washington Tavern and you had a couple of beers and you did that. And you know, by the end of the week, I mean, it's a lot of pressure. So yeah, you let off some steam. Everybody went out together. We were a young, kind of cool fraternity, and you know, we shared a lot of things in common. One was having a pride to put the best show we could on, and at the end of the day, you know, you wanted to unwind, and that's kind of what a lot of people did, still do, as a matter of fact. You know? Yeah,
I'm sure it still goes on. The happy hour is not a hidden topic. I mean, you see the advertisements everywhere. Yeah, seemingly so. You guys are locally famous. Your bars, people know who you are. Yeah. It's coming along with everything. I can see it. I can see. So painkillers. We opened up. We had that thing happen with it. When do painkillers come in?
Yeah, I had played a lot of sports, and I had developed a pretty serious back situation. And you know, my personal doctor suggested I go to a back surgeon in town, which I did, and very respected, very well-known back surgeon. And we opted at the time not to have surgery. It was an upper back issue. He put me on pain management program, and I had never heard of that before. I knew nothing about it. This would have been in the early 2000s. And So he gave me, at the time, it was a drug called hydrocodone, which
Mhm.
is in the family of Oxycontin. And he gave me muscle relaxers as well. Unfortunately, I abused the hydrocodone, but the whole origin of it was a back injury that I had playing sports and just wear and tear and getting old, to be bluntly honest with you. And
Yeah.
I took, at first I took the hydrocodone as prescribed, and then I abused it. To be bluntly honest with you, I just took too much of it. And, it made me feel good. It not only took the pain away, it made me feel incredibly good. I enjoyed the high, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Couple that with some beers, like you explained, after a long week or a long day's work, and it's a lot. It's a familiar topic. I've heard the same from many people, and it look, they call them painkiller for a reason.
Oh, exactly. If I could share a quick story, there was a really one of the best baseball players that ever come out of Baltimore, is a kid named Gavin Floyd, who ended up pitching in the big leagues for about 8, 9 years. He went to Mount St. Joe. My buddy was a scout for the Orioles at the time. He goes, "Hey, Mount St. Joe's playing. Gavin's pitching today. Come on out." It was a rainy day, and I had just gotten the prescriptions filled. And they looked exactly alike. I had a little cosmetic bag that I would keep in my car with TV makeup and all that stuff, which my kids would laugh at me. Dad, what do you got a makeup bag for? So, but I had the vials of I had the hydrocodone and the muscle relaxers in that. So my back was barking one day. It was raining. Went to see Gavin pitch, and I lived by the airport, driving up the Beltway. Took what I thought were muscle relaxers. Took 2 of them. Instead, it was the hydrocodone. And I remember getting to the field. It's about a 20-minute drive. And I mean, I felt this wave of just, whoa, never felt it before. And what I didn't know at the time was hydrocodone was extremely addictive. And so didn't think much of it. About 3 or 4 days later, my back fired up again. I took 2 more hydrocodone, which was 1 more than prescribed. And then 4 hours later, I took 2 more. 4 hours, I took 2 more, and I was off and running. But it was that simple of a mistaken. Not saying I wouldn't have become addicted to it had I just taken the muscle relaxers instead, but who knows? But that's how it happened. That triggered the addiction and my dependence on it.
Yeah, as a person in recovery, I can certainly relate to a period of time or a sequence of events that certainly things changed, right? So I'm starting to use something perhaps attained by a doctor, but and then I'm not using it per every 4 hours. I'm sort of delivering it in different methods and stuff like that. And all of a sudden I've got no more choice in the matter. So, thank you for sharing that. I think it's important for those of us in the recovery to hang on to those particular times where things did change, that standout event. So I'm glad that you still hang on to that and that you shared that with us. Did you eventually, by the way, what sports did you play as a youngster?
I played football, basketball, and baseball in high school all the way through, and I was fortunate enough to play baseball in college, and that's as far as I got. Wasn't good enough. Couldn't hit the curveball, as they say.
That's pretty good. I always kind of looked at those 3 sport athletes in high school. That you might as well have been gods to me. So that's quite remarkable in and of itself. So you ended up in treatment, right?
Right.
So you're taking painkillers now.
Yeah.
Things get out of control, obviously.
Yeah. No one. I was a functioning drug addict. I learned that phrase in rehab, but no one knew I was fighting this demon. And Kabir, I took this stuff for a couple of years. Man, I pharmacy shopped.
Yeah.
I mean, I did everything. I tried to detox myself a couple of times. Got to that, proverbial 3rd day and couldn't do it. And I realized after like the 2nd year, I remember looking in the mirror. A buddy of mine wants to write a book with me about it, and I said, well, if we do, it's going to be The Mirror Doesn't Lie, because I remember looking in the mirror and saying to myself, man, you got a major problem. You're a drug addict, but no one knew it. My kids didn't know it. My ex-wife didn't know it. Scott Garceau, who was my closest friend, he was the sports director at Channel 2 at the time. I was the weekend sportscaster. We were like brothers, and he didn't know it. And finally, I had to share it with somebody. So I told my ex-wife and I told Scott that I had this problem. It's been going on for a couple of years. I was masking it from everybody. but it was controlling my life. It was completely controlling my life. So he and I walk upstairs to our general manager at the time and sat down with them, explained the situation. They could not have been more supportive at WMAR, unbelievably supportive. So that's when I went to Father Martin's Ashley for my first rehab. I went to 2 rehabs. I'll get into the second one later, but the first one was Father Martin's. Did the 28 days. It was Thanksgiving weekend of 2004. And, you know, I thought I had come out with all the tools I needed to deal with it. But one thing I didn't listen to was the relapse, the relapse scenario. That was a big part, as you know, Kabir, of any rehab treatment center. And I just thought, hey, I got all the drugs out of my system. I felt like the old me again. I'm good. I'm fine. I don't need to worry about this anymore. You know, it's behind. But, you know, as we may get in a little bit later as to what led me to get arrested, it's a fascinating kind of a scenario. But that was my first visit to the rehab center up in Haverty Grace. And they were just fantastic. Did a great job.
Oh, well, world-renowned, fantastic center. We at Amateur's Recovery Centers do refer to them, and they've been around forever. I'm you know, things change over time. I'm sad they lost to Father Martin's part of it. They're just Ashley addiction now, but things get
Exactly.
Same.
I totally. You said it better than I did, buddy.
Yeah.
Well done. I agree.
So well, you just led me into my next question. Something happens, you get caught stealing painkillers. So I mean,
right.
That was my next question. Really, what happened?
Yeah, it's interesting. Mm-hmm. You know, I was clean, and I went back on the air, and everything was fine. And this is the power, the psychological power of the narcotic that I was taking, and I had no idea this was really an issue. So I wasn't using any of the narcotics. You know, I would take a couple, you know, Advil if the back flared up a little bit. But it's funny, when I got clean, the pain went away magically. Wow, the pain's gone. So, but my next door neighbor, interesting story. About a year later, next door neighbor and I shared a tree, and the power lines were in the middle of the tree. So I was going to get the tree branches cut down. So I knock on her door, and I said, "Hey, Mrs. Like, I'm not going to share her name, but can we do this?" And there was a couple of vials of pain medication on an end table right next to the door. Or there was a couple of vials of some sort of medication. I don't know if they were pain medication, but she was a cancer patient, so I'm assuming it was pain medication. And it consumed me. This was a Wednesday night. It consumed me all night. Psychologically, I'm like, man, I gotta have that just in case I need it. It was mind-boggling. So the next day, at the time at Channel 2, the Baltimore Blast indoor soccer team we were taping a weekly blast show with them. We did it on Thursday morning. So I taped the show in the morning, came home, let my dog out. Literally, I know she was out of the house, walked next door. I know she kept the door open, opened the door, picked up the vial of pain medication, walked back to my house. That simple, that easy. What I didn't know was her house was robbed about 6 months earlier, and they had cameras in the house. So 10 minutes later, 2 Anne Arundel County detectives who I knew my father really well. He was very active in the community. Said, "Hey, we just saw you." They asked me what happened. I fessed up. Yeah. I told the truth, and they took me to jail.
Wow.
And you know, that the rest, I guess, was kind of became public knowledge. But it was the most humiliating moment in my entire life, without question.
Yeah.
But the psychological pull of the narcotic was unbelievable. And had I learned more about the relapse process, that was probably going to happen. Maybe I would have been much more prepared for it, to deal with it when that moment in time came, when I looked at the pain medication in her house. But I didn't, because I thought I was too stubborn.
Yeah. It's so powerful. And it's really important that you're sharing it, describing it in the way that you are here for the listener to hear, that the draw is so powerful. You're telling my story. I don't know if I've shared this on any of the previous episodes or not, but I'll go ahead and do it now. I had a relapse after 18 months, and around a year, I'm going to this household with a former boss of mine that would let me in his house, big fancy house in Potomac, and his wife was on a lot of medications. And yeah, I passed the kitchen counter. Keith, I passed the kitchen counter. I don't know how many times. You know, I'd go out back and use his pool to take my very young daughter at that time. You know, great guy. Let me, had the alarm code to his house. And one day I decided not to pass those bottles. And then I put my hands on them, start turning the labels. And all of a sudden, I grab something that's not mine. So it happens, and it happens in a split second. And while it can happen, and relapse oftentimes can be a part of one's journey, it's not the end, and it wasn't the end for you. So after that, you mentioned there's a second visit to rehab.
Yeah. And
Okay.
and it's interesting. My sister was and still is a huge influence in my life. Her and my brother-in-law, and I got arrested. I mean, I got taken down to the Anne Arundel County Detention Center, and when I went for the booking, I mean, there were 4 TV. This is going to sound egotistical. All 4 TV stations were there to cover it, including mine. And I get out of the van, and I'm literally in chains, walking into the courthouse, and it was, again, very humiliating. But I still internally deny that I still had a problem. Like, I wasn't using. I made an obvious mistake, but I'm good. I told my sister I'm good, and my brother-in-law just said, "No, you're not. You just got arrested." And my kids were in my. We went back to my ex-wife's house. My kids were there, and I remember looking in their eye, and I lost their trust. I realized that they're old enough now to really realize. My daughter just started high school. My son was in middle school, and I realized that I had just lost my trust. So we had a powwow the next day. I was going to Partners in Recovery at that time up at Shepherd Pratt, and a woman named Mandy Frank was my counselor, and she wanted me to go back to Father Martin's. I said, I'm not going back to Father Martin's. If I go up to Father Martin's, you drop me off, I'm walking down Route 40 and walking back home, not going back there. And I was stubborn. I was really, again, I was still under the control of the narcotics psychologically. Right. So finally, the decision was made for me to go down to Eric Clapton's facility down in Antigua. And by now, I was suspended again from Channel 2, and the news director and GM at that time was a guy named Drew Barry, whose son Andrew, by the way, is the new general manager of the Cleveland Browns. Just to throw that in there. All right. So, but Drew was very supportive of me. And the last thing he said to me, actually, when I had to fly to Puerto Rico, then into Antigua, he met me at the airport. It was Super Bowl weekend, 2006. He met me at the airport and basically said, "Hey, let me know when you get down there. I'll have information on whether you still have your job." And I knew I was going to get fired, which I did. So I get down there, call him back, and I had gotten fired. I went to the nurse and said, "Hey, you need to find a cab that just dropped me off. I just lost my job. I'm out of here. And woe is me, doom and gloom. It was all about me." And she says, hold on, wait a minute. You just got here. Walk outside, give us a little bit of time, and let things digest a little bit. So I walk outside, and beautiful setting. I mean, I'm looking out over the harbor, and there's the entertainment area of Antigua is right across the harbor, and people are singing and dancing and drinking and doing all this stuff. And I'm standing next to the swimming pool, and I am feeling as low as I've ever been. All of a sudden, young guy walks up to me, puts his hand out, and goes, "Mr. Mills, glad you're here." I'm like, "We know each other?" He goes, "Yeah, I'm blankety blank. You did a story on me in high school, Towson High School, when we won the state championship. I scored a winning goal. You interviewed me, asked for the game." I said, "Hey, that's great." I said, "But I'm getting ready to get out of here, man. I just lost my job." He goes, "You just got here." I said, I'm gone. He goes, "Hey, come on, let's take a walk." We walk around the facility. By the time we got back, the nurse said, "Nancy," I think her name was Dowd, "she wants to talk to you. She's your counselor." I said, "I got nothing to say to her. I'm out of here." So I go in, and she says, "I just talked to your sister, and under no circumstances are you to leave this facility right now. We will lock you down if we have to." And I said, "You talked to Diane?" She goes, "Absolutely." So I was never a big things happen for a reason thing, but if this young man did not come up to me and we take a walk, I might have left. I don't
Yeah.
know. But anyway,
What
that
what are
gave
the
them
chances?
time. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So anyway, and the guy's bet I took at it's common knowledge that was Colin Farrell, the actor.
Oh, wow.
We passed in the nurses station. He goes, "Hey mate," he goes, "Hey mate, the bet is yours. I'm out of here." I said, "Okay, whatever." So anyway, sorry about that. So anyway, I stayed, and that weekend, this was a Thursday. That weekend was family weekend. My sister and brother-in-law got on a plane the next down there for family weekend, and it kind of changed my whole perspective on getting a handle on this. They sat through the, you know how that goes, Kabir. You got a lot of classroom sessions, you have a lot of meetings, and they sat through all of it. And at the end, before they left, my brother-in-law says, "You know what? Everybody should go through this, because this is not just a substance abuse scenario. This is a mental health issue as well." And man, he was spot on. That's one thing I learned, that it's much a mental health thing as it is a physical addiction to the pain or to the narcotic. And those 28 days down there changed my life without question.
That's
No doubt about it.
Incredible story. I've heard about that center down in Antigua. What I mean, just on an atmosphere level, what a beautiful area to be in. And I mean, that couldn't be lined up better. I mean, here you have a kid from Towson just there. I mean, what are the chances? You're in Antigua, for God's sakes. And
well, we had the same counselor. That's why she knew he knew I was coming down. We had the same counselor. So they were all in on it. I wasn't.
Yeah, that tends to be the case. It's important. And I'm glad you highlighted the fact about the mental health piece of it, because they are casting a lot of positive light on it these days, and a lot of awareness being brought to it. So I'm glad you shared that detail with us as well. So reestablishing your career after all this, forget about the fact that you had a lot of notoriety, and that at a baseline level, a lot of folks lose their jobs and they end up in a treatment center. Maybe some of our listeners are facing that right now, or they've come out of treatment, or family members that share that part of the hope with us.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I was fighting that demon as well. But I was damaged goods when I got out. No one wanted to touch me in the Baltimore market. Hey, I was a drug addict. I went to rehab twice. I got arrested. Why would they? Scott Garceau was still in my corner, and we have the same agent, guy named Tony Agno. And Tony was talking to some people. But what happened is that two things. A good friend of mine who's actually down here with me this weekend, just spending some time, a guy named Mike Gaffigan. At the time, he was the vice president of communications for the Maryland Jockey Club. He kind of ran at Preakness. He was our sports producer at Channel 2 when I first got there back in the late 80s. He made a couple of calls. It was right around Preakness time. He made a couple of calls to WBAL, Ed Kiernan and Jeff Beauchamp, who ran WBAL and 98 Rock Radio at that time, and said, "Hey, listen, you may want to bring in Keith Mills to help you guys on your Preakness coverage," because that was his MO at Channel 2. Did a lot of Triple Crown stuff, and they took a shot. So I went up and interviewed with Ed, with Mark Miller, who was the WBAL radio news director, and then Jeff Beauchamp, who was the program director, and they signed me up to work the Preakness coverage in the mornings, and then we would do a 5-hour show Preakness Saturday, and that morphed into getting a full-time job both in TV and radio for Channel 11 and WBAL, because they're all in the same building. So I had a chance to meet Michelle Butt, the news director of TV, Jordan Wertley, the general manager of television. We worked out a deal where I would do morning TV and morning radio. But if it wasn't for Mike, giving me a vote of confidence with these guys, and it wasn't for them to go out on a limb and take a shot. Ed Kiernan was the guy. He was my guardian angel. He retired a couple of years ago from WBAL. He was my guardian angel. But if it wasn't for Mike Gaffigan, and ironically just walked in the door right now, Mike, I'm talking about you, buddy. So that's how I got the job at WBAL, on his recommendation, and then Ed Kiernan and Jeff Beauchamp and Mark Miller and those guys taking a chance, because they didn't have to. And I'll never forget when Ed actually offered me the full-time job. I asked him, I said, "You want me to take a drug test every week?" "I will." He goes, not necessarily. To this day, I talk to him once a month, and he is still my guardian angel. He's a guy that I will go to my grave always respecting.
That's awesome. And it's pretty fair to say that, had you not stayed clean or sober, that
Oh
these
yeah.
folks wouldn't have taken. I know for myself, a lot of folks wouldn't have taken a chance on me if I didn't actively participate in my recovery. And I'm glad that we're both sitting here today and talking to each other about that.
Well, it's interesting. I was on house arrest. I didn't serve any prison time. I got 9 months house arrest, and I don't know if you know this. For every day you serve, you lose a day of service. So I actually served 4.5 months with a thing on my ankle, a monitor on my ankle. And Mark Miller was he was a news director at WBAL radio. He was kind of like my liaison with my probation officer. And every week he had to check in. I had to check in at the Anne Arundel County Detention Center down in Glen Burnie. And it was very humbling. I'm going in and it's they don't care who I am. I had to toe the line. I had to do what they said. All I could do was work, take my kids to school, go to the gym. That's all I was allowed to do. So anybody that says that house arrest is not a big deal has never done it. That's what I tell them. You haven't done it because you're a prisoner in your own home, but you're still a prisoner. And that also shaped my desire to stay clean, work through this, show everybody that you can do it.
Yeah,
that was very motivating.
That's the important message here is to stay clean, stay sober, and follow the line. And a lot of times things fall in place. It's not always easy, but things do. Keith, yeah. I hope you come back with us with another episode or something.
Oh, absolutely.
I feel like there's a lot more stories here.
Kabir, when I come back home, I'm down in Florida for those that don't know, but I'm coming back at the end of June for the entire football season. I still do the Ravens for WBAL, and I broadcast Navy football, which are also broadcast on WBAL. So I would love to come in the studio with you guys or come into your office and pick up on this, because it is, as you know, right now more than ever, particularly with the young kids, particularly with the fentanyl and heroin and things that are just everywhere right now. I think this message cannot be delivered enough. We need to do a better job, I think, from a government standpoint, in doing what we did kind of like years ago with the drunk driving. It was on billboards everywhere. You get a DUI, it's going to change your life. Well, you know what? You put a needle in your arm right now, you're dying.
Yeah.
It's not, you're not going to rehab. You're dying. And we've got to do a better job, I think, collectively, all of us are getting that message out to the kids, man, because we've seen it all too much. Going to too many funerals.
Yeah.
Too many funerals.
Well, thanks, Keith. Well, there you have it, folks. We hope that Keith Mills has shown you that no matter how far you've gone into addiction, there is a way up and a way out. If you or a loved one needs help with addiction, call Amethyst today at 855-80-SOBER or visit us online at amethystrecoverycenters.com. As always, you can find episodes of Share at amethystrecoverycenters.com/share or download episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for joining us on another episode of Share. I'm Kabir Singh, and we'll see you next time.